I have been working with this group for a few months now. I came to the group a little bit late. This was a great group to work with, a great bunch of people, some of which I knew beforehand, just from running around the Fourth Ward. But we had some tough conversations in this group, tougher than I thought we would have. Not that I came to it with expectations, but just a lot of stuff to talk about, and a lot to hash out. And there were some tough conversations, but I think those conversations, which happened constantly throughout the months we worked on this, helped to inform the work that was done by this group. And this group formed several subcommittees, which then went off and did a lot of research and a lot of work. And this group was public facing. So they interfaced with the police, which of course is public facing. And then they held meetings with residents and community conversations and things like that. So there was a lot of work done here, a lot of, I think, thoughtful work done. And I think that is seen in the recommendations that the group will now present. All 19 of them? 16, sorry. So I won't say anymore and get 5-minute head start.
Turn it on over to you.
Great.
Thanks.
I'm Terry Tim. I've been a resident of Mount Lebanon since 1994, and I've been involved in a lot of community activities. Most of them had to do with sports and athletics. And so this has been a really exciting experience for me to kind of get into the work of our municipal government and to work with an amazing group of citizens on this particular working group. We, unlike the group that previously presented, we are not all working professionals in this field. We have a lot of experience and passion. And one of the things that this group, just as Commissioner Gorella said, we've really dug in and done a ton of research, had numerous conversations with people that are stakeholders in this conversation. And I'm just really grateful for this group and the work that they have done. This is a complex issue. We had a slow start. We had a few bumps in the road along the way, and we probably had about 6 months worth of work. We had a year's worth of work and more that we concentrated into a short period of time. So one of the things that just up front is probably some of the questions that you might have. We might say something like, we need some more time to research that. These are our initial findings, and we look forward to keeping the work going and collectively coming up with the best answers to make our community a safe community and a welcoming community for all people. And that's really our goal. So just want to share kind of our purpose and agenda here for the next few minutes. We just want to talk about our purpose as a group. We want to talk about the methodologies, the various methodologies that we used along the way. And then, as Commissioner Gorella said, we have 16 recommendations that we want to share with you and dialogue with you. So the goals that you gave us as a working group are fourfold. One, that we would research, review, and recommend national initiatives. And so we've done a lot of research around that, what are best practices in different cities across our country. To work and focus on data collection and transparency research and recommendations. And so you'll see some of that in our presentation. Thirdly, to gain an understanding of the existing recruitment, application, interview, and testing processes for all other police department officers, and to make recommendations of ways to expand that pool of applicants and increase diversity. So that piggybacks right on the presentation that we just heard. So you're going to see some overlap there. And then the fourth piece, again, Commissioner Gorella mentioned, to organize and conduct community conversations to inform this work. And so we did that both formally and informally along the way. The methodologies that we used in our work, we had conversations with Chief Lau. We had 4 subgroups that were involved in this work, and at least I know 2 of those groups had substantive formal conversations with the chief. And then many of us had individual conversations with the chief along the way, and those were very, very valuable. We appreciate Chief's availability and access and his willingness to dialogue with us in that work. There's a ton of research that has gone into our recommendations, and Those are part of the documentation that we gave you. I think 60 pages worth of our research. They're there. We also have had numerous conversations with content experts, both locally and nationally, whether that's people here, again, in the academic world here in Pittsburgh, police departments in different cities. We've been very intentional about trying to find people who have expertise in this space and tap into their wisdom. And then again, engaging in community conversations with stakeholders here in Mount Lebanon. It's been an important part of our process. So the last kind of overview piece is that we've taken these 16 recommendations and we put them into 5 buckets. What about police engagement working group? What about our work over the long term? Secondly, recruiting, hiring, and HR, inclusion and community building. Fourth is contracted professionals and collaboration. And then the last bucket is policies and contracts. And so you're going to see in the slides that come up, there'll be 3 or 4 recommendations under these 5 categories. And we probably I think the best process is to let us kind of go through these recommendations. If there's some fine points of clarification, if we could do that, but then kind of save kind of the overarching questions at the end, as we can kind of hopefully weave some things together.
That makes sense. So you prefer very minimal questions, just kind of clarifying stuff,
Yes.
so that you have enough time to get through the whole presentation, and then we can take questions on that at the end.
Yes.
Okay.
And basically, my task here is to walk you through these 5 buckets, and then we've got our team members here to dialogue with you and have a conversation about specific questions, because we did divide this work up into 4 different subgroups. All the members of the team were served on 2 of those subgroups. So there's a lot of overlap and a lot of expertise and research that's sitting here at the table. So that's the process. Okay. So the first area is work over the long term. Now, recommendation number 1, extend the work of this group for 6 to 10. Policing is ongoing. And likewise, this work around police engagement should be more than a one-off exercise. It's really important that we work on this continually over time. Trust takes time to develop, especially in communities that are underrepresented and underserved, and maybe over-policed. And so this is really important that we keep this work going. Again, we feel like we're just beginning to kind of scratch the surface of research and best practices and all that. So we think it's really important that we have more time as a group to keep pressing into this. A second recommendation 12, and you see these are not ordered sequentially because when we did the initial recommendations, they were in these different areas, but then we wanted to bring them together under these 5 buckets. So extend the work. Secondly, we think it's really important that we enter into a contract with Professor David Harris, University of Pittsburgh, and to use him as a consultant to help us frame out our work. He is a nationally known expert who's right here in our city. He's authored many books around policing and community policing, data transparency. You've probably seen him on TV at different times. He is an expert right here. He is willing to enter into some work with us. The cost of that would be at a low end $1,200 for a 6-month contract, where we would get 1 hour a month with Professor Harris, to a year-long contract where we have 2 hours a month with him, which at a cost of $4,800. The third recommendation around there is to make the police engagement working group a permanent part of the community relations board. So once we kind of extend the work, but then we really feel that it needs to have a permanent home with the CRB. That it sits in that space, again, to help us over the long haul create a more welcoming, diverse community. Along with that, we want to continue to encourage, to refine and to refocus the CRB's mission by creating a more inclusive group of stakeholders in the community that will work on these issues and opportunities that are facing us as a community. And then lastly, looking for a collaborative process between the police department, the commissioners, and the CRB to hold quarterly community conversations, to engage the community collaboratively, collectively on issues that are important around DEI, around policing, to look for ways to connect with the community in safe environments, to extend this conversation in broader and more diverse ways. We've engaged in some of those at a micro level, and we've created some process and some structure that we've used in smaller conversations. And some of that could be used as framework for these larger conversations that are held, again, over time and throughout our community. But we really think it's important that it's a collaborative approach. So that's the work around police engagement over the long term. Let me move ahead to the second bucket, which is one recommendation, which is to increase the diversity of demographics, skill sets, and life experiences of police officers. Again, you're going to see a lot of overlap here between our work and what we just heard. One of the things that Chief Law has been very transparent with us is that it is difficult to recruit people of color to the Mount Lebanon Police Department. People of color don't apply. The police department has difficulty finding qualified applicants, and this issue is not unique to our municipality. This is a problem nationwide, and it's an opportunity that we can step into. So our first kind of bullet point around this connects again deeply with the work that we just heard, to conduct an independent audit of the recruitment process and recruitment and hiring process. So perhaps this group will partner with us.
Yeah.
We could, and we're especially happy to see that they're willing to do it, because there could be a $50,000 price tag on that. So,
Like 13.
well, 13. Depends how big you want to go. So we've got in-house and internal audit. That's fantastic. Appreciate that. And that really leads to kind of the second one. Based on that audit, how do we need to revamp and expand our recruitment process to attract this wider range of applicants? What do we need to do in-house, in our own community, to develop potential future police officers? How do we partner with other organizations throughout the city that can help create a larger pool of applicants? Replace the post-written test with the PAC test. So what is post, what is PAC? We currently use post, the police officer selection test, which is an entry-level test that's important. It measures basic cognitive, mathematical, grammar, writing kind of skills. It's really important. We're suggesting, and part of this came out of our conversation with the chief, to use a different test, the PAC, the Police Aptitude and Character Test, which captures both the cognitive, but it also talks about more social, community building kinds of skills, decision-making, negotiation, morals, ethic, and character. We think those things are important, so we're recommending we start measuring that and evaluating that right from the get-go. There is a lot of detail in this packet that we gave you around the whole hiring process. It's a very complex and process that the chief has put together, and we appreciate having dialogue with him. So there's a lot more there. We don't have time to go into all those details. But one of the things we're suggesting, add another interview day, increase the pool of candidates from 25 to 36. That would add one more day to interview, but if we can find 36 candidates that qualify, meet the qualifications, let's see what that might do. Increase the interview panel. We have currently the interviewing panel consists of 3 people. One of those is a resident of the municipality. This is an opportunity to expand that, particularly among underrepresented and underserved population in our community. So it's a way that we can do that. And then last 2 things, expand the tattoo policy to be more inclusive. Again, we've had a conversation with Chief about that. And then lastly, this connects to group that you start, become a member of Vibrant Pittsburgh. Vibrant Pittsburgh is an economic development nonprofit that really is committed. Their mission statement is to build a thriving and inclusive Pittsburgh region by attracting, maintaining, and elevating a diversity of talent. And so you can become a member of that organization. The cost is between $2,500, I believe, and $4,000. There are different investment levels, but that gives you access to their tools, their webinars, their platforms, measurements. Yep.
Just to be clear, it would likely, did I hear that we have 130 employees for Mount Lebanon?
Yeah, that doesn't include seasonal, but yes.
154.
Okay, but it's less than 499, but more than 100, correct? So that would be a $5,000 membership if it was for the entire municipality. If we were looking solely at the police department instead of the entire municipality, it would be more at the $2,500 level. Just while we're on the topic.
Yes. And you said up to 500 employees with
499.
499. Okay.
That is $5,000.
We could loop in some part-time then maybe.
100 people is, less than 100 people is so 99 or less is the $2,500 level.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sorry?
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, sure. Just while we're on it.
Great. Okay, the next bucket of recommendations is around inclusion and community building. There are 4 recommendations here. One very simple one, but important recommendation 5. Make sure that our union contract, that all of our policy manuals use gender inclusive language. That's an easy one that doesn't require a lot of cost or anything. It's some wordsmithing. Requiring R8 is requiring all Mount Lebanon Police Department employees to participate in regular ongoing DEI accessibility training. Sworn officers participate in this on, I believe, an annual basis. There's lots of things that are built into this work, but we're asking that we would expand that to all Mount Lebanon Police Department employees. R10 talks about Mount Lebanon Police Department visibility in the community, improving communications. We know that our police department, they're doing some progressive things. They're doing some creative things with initiatives and programs in our community, but we also recognize that those are invisible to many members of our community. They just simply aren't aware of that. So trying to find ways to leverage social media and other forms just to be, have more visibility with the good work that our department is doing. And then R11 has to do with enhancing community policing around. I want to be clear on this language. One, we have a community outreach. We have community outreach specialists who do great work in the community, but we think it's really important to find ways to get the entire police department to be more visible and present in the community. A lot of our citizens, their exposure, their experience with the police department is in their cars. And we know that's really important for them to be in their cars, but how do we get them out of their cars and more visible holistically as a police force? And so that's recommendation number 11 there, in inclusion and community building. And then around contracted professionals and collaboration. Sorry.
Just a minor omission in the last half there. The focus on building bridges and addressing specific needs of segments of the population that have traditionally been vulnerable. That's important. Separate from just being out and engaged with the community more broadly, is to reach out to and collaborate with subsets of our large population. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. This has to do with contracted professionals and collaboration. The first recommendation 9 here, Chief has already begun this process. Has created a job description for a data analyst who I believe is at a 16-hour-a-week kind of position, shifting around some things. And so we applaud that. We think that's really important. Data transparency is super important. So we are recommending that we have somebody work with the municipality around developing what this will look like, and then over time implementing this data transparency program. And again, that this would be more of a collaborative process with the police department and the chief and the commissioners. What data is important? How do we interpret the data? What's the philosophy of data transparency? This is one of those areas where we would love to have more conversation with an expert like Professor David Harris to drill into this, so that we're making better decisions around how we collect data, what data we use, what transparency looks like. And so,
Just clarifying question. I'm having a hard time asking questions. I have so many questions, but I'll leave them to the end. But so this recommendation is really, it looks like we're moving forward in this area, but you want to make sure that the residents or some outside experts are contributing to what data is being collected, right?
That is a crucial part of it. And another crucial part is that there are also reports coming to the commissioners, so that you all are playing the oversight role, which I know it's currently multiple steps up, but ensuring that that information is coming up to you, and potentially also to the CRB, since we're also talking about making this a more permanent part of the CRB with our work. So that would depend how that all shakes out and where it falls and that sort of thing. But for additional transparency, sorry, you were about to go.
Oh, it's okay. You covered it. So. And the other thing I'll add is on recommendation 9, this is not a new hire, but like Harry was saying, this is just so not adding headcount, we're just making a new job description. So that's not a headcount.
and then recommendation 11, again, this is Chief is already working on this. Or 13, yeah, excuse me, 13. Has already created some partnership with outreach, and this goes quite a bit beyond that. This is a creative approach that would be a partnership with different organizations and municipalities. Chief is beginning to tease this out with other communities. I think Chief's plan here is to hire two social workers. Is that correct? Chief, yeah, 2, and they would be full-time workers, but those costs would be shared among participating communities. So this is really critical. There's a ton of research, that shows crisis intervention teams associated with lots of positive things happening in communities, keeping people safe and healthy, reducing officer injuries, all sorts of good things if we can get into this space. So again, Chief is already working on this, and our recommendation, we just want to encourage that work, particularly collaboratively here in the South Hills.
One more quick clarifying.
Yeah.
The 2 potential employees, would they report to outreach or would they report to the MLPD? Or maybe that's a cheap question.
Outreach.
Okay, thank you.
And we agree with that recommendation
Okay.
that he has. So just for clarity.
Okay, perfect.
And then, the last question, right? Yep. Policies and contracts. So R4 is the recommendation to renegotiate our police union contracts so that officers who have been fired or suspended for cause may not have that decision reversed through any arbitration process, independent of the police department administration and our civil service board. Our 6 has to do with a recommendation to adopt social media policy for all municipal employees, that there's a cohesive policy around that.
Great recommendation. We support it.
So we have been informed that there is one. We haven't seen it. We've only seen the one for the police department, which is where this gets a little tricky. And so our recommendation is coming from it should be collective and work for all departments of the municipality. And also looking at a more longitudinal check that comes up in the next one, that it kind of jives together. So sorry.
Yep, no worries. So recommendation 7 has to do with periodic checks. One of the things, we have a very rigorous process in terms of the hiring process. And our suggestion is that we build in some periodic checks with officers, particularly around advancement and promotion types of things. Could be an opportunity. Again, not that we suspect that bad things are happening, but a way of creating transparency, accountability around these particular areas that we've mentioned here. And social media checks is part of that. And then R15 is a recommendation to opt into the Allegheny County Independent Police Board. That was established and when was that established?
It's only actually
Starting
to be in
January
effect,
1st,
yeah.
2022, right? And so this is a board that has investigative powers, but no enforcement mandate. And we believe that opting into this, again, could go a long way to demonstrating transparency and accountability and build trust among our citizens, particularly among underserved communities and underrepresented. 16 recommendations. Speed. But hopefully we've given you, we've tried to give you as much research as possible in that document that you have in your hands. And we'd love to answer any questions that you have.
Open it up to the commission.
You have a ton of questions. Go
I
ahead.
have a couple. I don't want to monopolize them. The test, I think it was PACT instead of POSTD. Is there another police group that you're aware of, or could you research other police groups that are currently using PACT to get some feedback
Yes,
on it?
with Austin, Texas, Denver. There's a group up in northwestern Pennsylvania that recently, through Mercer Harris College, they administer this test to a number of police departments in that part of the state. So it is being used in other cities and in our state as well.
Would you mind writing that up and maybe emailing it to Craig, who can send it to the whole commission, if you don't mind, just other police departments that are using that test and any other info you have on it, because that's really, it's very interesting. And just be helpful. Thanks.
One of the things you mentioned that we do, we require a 4-year university college degree, which puts us in, I believe, like there are 13% of police departments that require a 4-year degree. So we have a high educational standard to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good piece of the picture to understand. Yeah.
I'm very encouraged by recommendation 13, and I think it's an interesting one, but it speaks, this recommendation 13 is the form the crisis response partnerships. This is one of the areas where I'm constantly challenged personally with, because local government only has so much capacity. And that's one of the challenges that we face on all fronts, right? There's always a balancing act. So the question in my mind is always, how do we build capacity, not just within our own municipality, because tax dollars only go so far, but how do we build capacity within the broader community to work collaboratively across departments? And in this example is obviously around policing and mental health, and I think this is fantastic. We see it also, the topic in the region with fire departments as well. There are those same types of challenges of how do you collaborate. So as you were thinking about this, have you seen other examples of collaborative solutions through your research that kind of talks about how public agencies are coming together to fund these types of programs? Because that's really the heart of the challenge. Again, you only have so many dollars. How do you pool them effectively across lots of jurisdictions to most effectively resource a mental health support program? I mean, did you go that far in your research?
Short answer is no, we haven't gotten that far to consider funding issues. There certainly are different models for the kind of mental health police collaboration that you're talking about. I think the longest term one that I'm aware of, I think, was in Oregon, Eugene maybe, where they send out vans from the crisis intervention team on calls that most departments have to send police officers for. And I'm not quite sure what the funding mechanisms are behind that.
Right.
But a number of folks have done this kind of thing, and it's certainly something we could research to find out how you do it. It seems to me there are opportunities, I think, possibly with the St. Clair Hospital and its new commitment with the new facility that I think goes beyond, say, the mental health. There was always a psych ward. In the middle of the night, there was some place that the officers could take people besides jail. And it just seems like a natural thing to try to build on that kind of a partnership. And again, I think the chief's been thinking this way is through SHACOG and other pooled groups of, primarily municipalities. The county, I would think, would have an interest too, but we're not experts in this sort of thing. Commissioner Grella told us try to identify issues to make recommendations on, but it's not our job to solve the problem.
Yeah,
So,
right,
so our research sort of stopped before we got to your big question about how you actually fund these things.
Yeah, no, and I don't necessarily anticipate that you have a detailed answer. That wasn't my expectation. It's more, as you were looking at this type of topic, are there like communities where you're like, wow, look what they're doing? Yeah, it's that kind of like inspiration, of, ooh, wow. Yeah, and I could tell you, having lived on the West Coast, San Francisco, they put a lot of money into mental health support programs, struggled with it, right? And then they've had challenges, but they're also a very large city with lots of resources to go to this type of program. Obviously, in the South Hills of Pennsylvania, we have a very different kind of economic dynamic that we're trying to deal with. So are there communities where it's like, wow, look how they're thinking about it? That you can kind of say, well, maybe we won't do that, don't do it that way exactly, but there's a nugget of a really cool concept there that maybe we can kind of go down that path on. So if you run into those things, always need to see examples.
And honestly, Commissioner Flynn, I would say that the chief has been doing a lot of research and working on this a lot, that he might be one of the best resources on this because he really is already proactively working on this. The other piece that I would say is that this issue partially came up from one of our community conversations where members of the community were specifically concerned about certain recent events that we're all very aware of, and others, that they could see potentially different responses if other things were in place long-term. And one of them did suggest that something that would be much bigger than, a small SHACOG thing, but more countywide or regional, is similar to what they've tried to do in Austin. But then when I tried to research it, I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, so I didn't include it. But that their dispatches, including solely mental health providers as a thing that is dispatched. So you're not even sending out a police officer with a mental health professional, but you're just dispatching mental health. And then people can be a little more welcoming because there's less weapons showing up to their house. They can maybe calm down a little bit in certain circumstances. Certain circumstances, that is absolutely not the correct solution, right? And that's where we have to work much more broadly to dig in much more deeply. But that is where this conversation partially started, was from at least multiple residents in Mount Lebanon having concern and having interest in knowing of ideas of things that are going on out there. But I would definitely defer to the chief and ask that as part of our extension that we are requesting, that could be one of the areas that you have a lot of interest in. That's one of the things that as we ask for an extension, it would be helpful to know what would you really like us to be looking at in that extension, and what would you say is like done after tonight or the next few weeks of giving you the last little bits of things. And then that becomes part of kind of the more ongoing permanent piece. What is the thing that you would really like to see more of from this current
Yeah.
establishment, that would be helpful
That makes sense.
to us.
Yeah. Yeah, Chief, did you have anything to add to that recommendation about what you're already working on for commissioner clarity?
How much time do we have?
Yeah.
All right, I want to take away.
I could go on forever. It's definitely
It's a big one.
it's in the
Okay.
works, and there's all kind of county conversations. There's a lot of different resources that are out there.
Mhm.
The problem is pulling them all together because they all have their
Yeah.
mental specialties. When you go to a house, it could be a mental health issue, it could be a behavioral health issue.
Mhm.
And there's certain specialties throughout the county that do have resources and are expanding their resources. But ultimately, we've got to figure out a way to pull all of those resources together if that's help our community. And that's what we're looking to do.
Sounds like we should put it on a public discussion agenda for next, sometime in the future, just to
Yeah,
get
and
into a deep dive.
one specific thing that was brought up, right, is we have the Resolve Center that's in Homewood, right?
Yeah.
That's not close to here. It is a regional hub of place for all of these sorts of things, but it is very far from here if it's rush hour especially, And it's not exactly the right fit for a number of things that are going on here. So trying to kind of figure out what's a better local resource. And I think that is what Chief is working on through SHACOG and some of the other partnerships here, the diversion program outreach.
I just have one more question. So you just said, what do you want us to tell you to work on? But I would rather turn that back and say, if you have another 6 to 12 months, what do you want to work on? Because there's 16 recommendations here. And if you're kind of whittling it down and saying, these are the areas we'd really like to spend some more time.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in if I could. This was number 11, I think. I get it in 10 confused, but we have, and Chief can give us numbers about the number of bodies and hours worked and personnel that are devoted to automobile patrol. And then we have other functions like community outreach that are separate Monday through Friday, small units of the police department. And so the one thing, besides reaching out to vulnerable populations, which I think is, we just talked about, which is so important. But I would like to see a slight shift in emphasis to bring the patrol officers and incentivize and encourage them to make connections in the community, not just to be seen, but I think that's very important, but to know the community and have the community know them, and develop trust. If you get into the research on community policing, it's at least as effective as patrol in terms of actual responses to crime, and it seems from what I've read, and again, I'm not an expert, to help with prevention and such. And it's also particularly helpful in terms of making the community feel better about the police. They know people by name. If they've got a question, an issue, there's somebody that there's a face there. The Chief was telling me that before COVID broke, before COVID prevented it, they were trying a small program in the business community. And so I'm not sure how successfully that can be expanded, but that's the sort of thing that I have in mind and I'd like to work on, or see the group work on. I think is to find ways to engage in every aspect of the community.
COVID derailed a lot of what we were working on. And even as commissioners, we were talking about, coffee with the commissioner. And similarly, at the same time, Chief was talking about a very similar program on the police side. So I think that the recommendations were kind of all coming to the same place. And, hopefully the timing works out now where we can implement stuff like that.
I think I just want to underline what you said earlier when we were going through the presentation. It was about building bridges with certain groups within the community. And I think that that's important. And I think coffee with a cup is great, but I also think that not everyone can take a time off to do that. I mean, that's just a simple equation. And so you've got to find ways to actively outreach to them is what I thought I heard you sort of.
That's very much what I'm saying, and in informal ways. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I have been for almost 30 years here in Lebanon. And we go out in the middle of the night with the police, and we're at certain pockets of the community, a particular apartment building, where say there are a lot of immigrants from a certain place or whatever. And for the most part, those communities are invisible to the rest of the community. And you know, on the fire side, if you're in uniform, and those working duty shifts are, in some of those groups, you get a negative response because they've immigrated from countries where they haven't had good relations
Oh,
with
interesting.
people in authority. And so the more that these are, you know, a particular officer, you know, I'll just make this up, who maybe has ethnic roots in a particular community, has a particular interest or whatever, who can be kind of a liaison to a building even, or a neighborhood, or whatever, a youth group, you know, anything. It doesn't have to be as formal as in coming to community meetings and such. I think the outreach team unit, from what I can tell, does an excellent job of those very you know, directed things. I'm just really talking about getting more police more involved. I honestly think that would increase their job satisfaction too, because they know people and people would know them, and you know, they're not always dealing with people who are strangers and dealing with them in a crisis situation. And you know, again, I know the police do a lot of that. They do block parties, and so we just want to, I think, encourage more of the sorts of things like that that they've been doing, because so much of the resources, you know, go to patrol. The patrol officers have to be available to move to a call as soon as it comes in. It's different than if an officer were doing something with comp time on for his day off or something like that. You could put in a couple of hours here and there. So that's the kind of thing I was thinking of.
Commissioner Flynn, I don't know if we've done, but Vince, I'd love to hear a response to that from Vince and Lindsay, just because we're all working on different groups.
You're reading my mind. I want to make sure that we have left
Yeah.
to make sure there's something we didn't ask that you want to tell us.
And if it was online as well.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, I think you'd like to have some time to try to work with Dr. Harrison, and we proposed it, and also taking a deeper dive into the policy procedures. So I think policies and procedures were revised and came out at the beginning of September,
Yes.
and we had to have everything, I think, submitted to you guys.
October
and
1st.
also on October 1st. So
Yeah,
we had to have-
initial, yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit more of a window of time to kind of do a deeper dive
Uh-huh.
in those policies and procedures, and also, again, work with Dr. Harris to see, you know, is there anything that needs to be changed? Is there anything that needs to be added to that? So I think that's, you know, more group, I think that's something we certainly like to see. a bigger focus on.
Yeah, so beyond that, I mean, I think, you know, we're asking to make this a permanent part of the CRB. So helping to brainstorm and enact how that would be really important. I think that's something that we could do in ongoing work, you know, and working with the CRB with the task force stuff. I think there's a lot of things like the community conversations, you know, we've submitted a format that we think is helpful, but we've also done them. Any of the things, there's a lot of opportunities for us to assist because we've been digging into this stuff. And if you just kind of disband us, then like, I don't know, maybe we're less contactable, but I think that all of us would likely be happy if you reached out with a question to answer them. But similar to the other group talking about, like, you know, they would love to do an independent audit of the recruiting and hiring process for free. One of the things that, you know, I mean, is really easy, but that I heard as a question at one point was, you know, we're gonna have to pay somebody to make sure that the policy manuals and the union contract has gender inclusive language. I will sit and I will read through every word and I will make it say she, he, they, or say employee, and then have it marked up, and then someone just has to do it. Like those sorts of things, there's no reason that an outside person needs to be paid for these things that are documents that we already have access to, that we can easily do and make it, you know, not a thing that is using tax dollar money for. That is simple. You know, it's stuff that makes the hugest difference to be a welcoming community. When you have a manual that says, you know, when it says he, it means all people, I don't feel welcome, right? So it cannot say that. And I would love the opportunity to help it not say that. Okay. So like, let's use us, right? You know, that's one thing. All of the other places, you know, when we're talking about increasing the interview panel to include underrepresented groups, we can tap into other people that we know, you know, being support and assisting. And similarly, especially on the data piece, as we brought up earlier, Chief is already working to move forward with that. That's one of the pieces that Dr. Harris has said is the most important thing for us to have a transparent department, is that we are collecting data and that we are sharing data. And so if we can help kind of bridge him and us and research that we're doing elsewhere, which was, brought up, I think that is an amazing part of the continuation of the work. Any place that you need support, though, I think is really where we would be happy to, but establishing the longer term piece is really where I see it. Any other questions that you guys have? I know that we're close on time. Please just send them to us. We don't want you having to have discussion, debating these things without additional information. We submitted 60 pages of document, but we have, 120 worth of information that we just put what we could in there that was reasonable. And we're welcoming, doing more research. We already have 2 things that you want us to follow up on, but anything else, please do let us know.
And with the right format, you can email the entire group. Is that
I think
the
so,
easiest
yeah.
one? Then just whoever wants to jump in or whatever, can you jump in?
Yeah.
It's the easiest format.
Maybe Commissioner Corella wants to focus that on what through him, but anyway.
Yeah, we
whatever
do.
works for you guys.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, we didn't mention this yet. I mean, obviously the group, we have a group distribution list, but Marisa from the CRB has been fantastic, has been organizing a lot of this, has been liaison on the staff side. Laura Pace Lilly has obviously been very involved from day one. And so any of the contact through any of us direct to the committee has been amazingly responsive as well. So, and Chief has had several police officers at these meetings. So, we could probably funnel that side of it just for Chief, and he can decide who's appropriate to receive on the police side. But yeah, Marisa, Laura, myself, the group, Chief, I think we've got a good group there.
Yeah, I really want to say thank you, Commissioner Rainey and Foster, for getting this whole thing started a year or so ago. And as a committee, as a working group, Commissioner Grella and Chief Law has been very accessible to us, and Laura and Marissa has helped tremendously. So we're really, really appreciative of the support. This is important work, and it's ongoing work, and we're committed to it. I think it's really critical.
Yeah, I think I said this at the last meeting. I mean, we received, 100 recommendations from these 4 groups. And when Mindy and Leanne kind of brought this together and we sat and looked at it, the school board was doing a very similar initiative. And we looked at this and said, we want to be real deliberate with this, and we want to take the time that it needs. And, we helped to set up these committees for a year. Even I was surprised how much information came back and how many recommendations came back. Several groups have talked about making this, whatever this is, a more permanent part. Some, CRB, not CRB. Is it a staff member, not a staff member? Is it a continuing group? Is it embed in all different things? And I think that's something that we have to figure out. That's a very clear recommendation across all the lines, but there's so much here. I just didn't realize how much, we talk about doing baselines. It's almost, you don't know what you don't know. But I'm glad that we did it this way and took the time we did to get all of the recommendations we did.
And we realize this isn't even all that's possible, but but this is the start. And so it really is on us to figure out what that process is to move forward. So we have our work cut out for us.
Thank you for your time. We very much
Yes,
appreciate it.
thank you. And I actually have 3 questions. I'm not going to ask you now. I didn't want you to think I was disinterested, because I am interested. But I want to especially thank Chief and the police officers, because I think that if someone was looking at my job and what I do every day, and look, I work for a labor union, my members do that, and they review me, and luckily just reelected me for another 4 years. But but it's not an easy process to have someone review your work, and the fact that he is not defensive about it, that he is open, that he considers the community's opinions, I think is really, really important. And we're really lucky and blessed to have someone of that caliber that helps us. And we're lucky and blessed to have all of you come in and say, okay, we want to take a fresh look at this, which is what we asked you to do. So I'm just really grateful for that and for his leadership. So thank you.
And to Laura for all the
Yes.
evenings and weekends that she put in, supporting the group and helping facilitate all the questions that came through as well. And especially for the workers. Thank you for the countless hours that you put in this year. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric.
good job. Great job.
All your highlighting.
Thank you, Marisa, for the CRB liaison too. I know they said it. Thank you. Oh, what a great idea. A picture.
So we can look back.
Yeah.